The first blast struck just before dawn, tearing through the silence with a thunderous roar. The communications tower collapsed in a column of flame, and shards of metal rained down across the compound. Private alarms wailed, but they were drowned beneath the shriek of incoming fire. Within moments, Alpha Outpost was engulfed in chaos. Lieutenant Sophia Carter, a medic stationed at the base, had been in the medical bay, reviewing supply logs. The explosion hurled her across the room, glass shattering around her like deadly confetti. When she pulled herself up, smoke already seeped into the corridors, and the sound of boots thudded outside. Soldiers running, shouting, searching for cover. "Medical! We need medical!" A voice cried out, and the door burst open. A soldier staggered inside, blood soaking through his uniform where shrapnel had torn him open. Two others followed, half dragging another man who was unconscious, his head bandaged hastily with strips of cloth. Sophia's training surged to the surface. She grabbed gauze, barked orders, and pressed her hands against wounds before she could even think. Her world narrowed to injuries and survival. The air quaked with another explosion, the command center obliterated. That meant leadership was gone, leaving chaos in its place. Corporal John Miller, a radio operator, stumbled into the bay, clutching his bleeding arm. His face was pale, his voice hoarse. "Lieutenant, command is gone. Fire control's gone. We're it. This building might be the only thing still standing." Sophia scanned a growing number of casualties. Her resources were scarce, and artillery still pounded the base with precision. The medical base shook with every hit, ceiling tiles crashing down, pipes bursting overhead. She steadied herself, inhaled smoke, and made a decision. "John, help me move the critical patients to the basement. Reinforced concrete, it's safer down there. If this building goes, it might give us a chance." "But shouldn't we try to evacuate the compound?" John asked, wide-eyed. Sophia glanced through shattered windows. Outside, flames devoured vehicles, and ammunition stores exploded in a deadly chain. Artillery fire fell so steadily that the ground quivered like the heartbeat of doom. "There's nowhere to run," she said firmly. "We stay, and we fight for every life we can." The wounded kept coming. Private Michael Chun, dazed and stumbling from a head injury. Sergeant Emma Torres, her leg torn from collapsing debris. And Robert Williams, who dragged two injured comrades despite his own burns. The medical bay was no longer a place of treatment. It was a battlefield in itself. Sophia transformed the basement into a makeshift shelter. Stretchers were lined between crates of supplies, emergency lamps casting shadows that danced with the smoke. She stitched wounds with trembling hands while listening to the concussions overhead. Every patient had a story of survival etched into their faces. Private Chun winced as she pressed bandages against his scalp. "Ma'am, what if they come inside? The enemy? Ground troops?" Sophia held his gaze, seeing the fear of a young soldier not much older than a teenager. "Right now, your only job is to stay alive. Leave the rest to me." The bombardment raged for an hour. Sophia worked without pause, her body moving on instinct. Compress here, stitch there, adjust breathing masks, ration the last vials of morphine. The world outside was falling apart, but in that basement, she created a fragile island of survival. The east wing of the building finally collapsed, sending a shockwave that rattled the basement walls. Private Williams reported the destruction breathlessly, but Sophia only clenched her jaw. "Then we move faster. Nobody gets left behind." Through the roar of war, she carried on, one life at a time. By dawn, the medical bay above was gone, but in the basement below, 18 soldiers still breathed, clinging to life, because one woman refused to let them die. The ground did not stop trembling. Even deep in the basement, the thunder of artillery rolled above like the heartbeat of some mechanical giant determined to crush everything in its path. Each detonation rattled the concrete, sending tiny cascades of dust raining down on the cots and stretchers where wounded soldiers lay. The air was damp with sweat, smoke, and the metallic tang of blood. Lieutenant Sophia Carter stood at the center of it all, her sleeves rolled up, her uniform stained with crimson. She was no longer just a medic. She was a lifeline, the single thread holding 18 men and women together as the base above them collapsed. She worked in constant motion. Sergeant Emma Torres had a mangled leg that needed cleaning and binding before infection set in. Private Michael Chin drifted in and out of consciousness, his head injury threatening to push him into a coma. Corporal John Miller clutched his bleeding arm, but forced himself to act as Sophia's extra hands, holding clamps, tying off bandages, and steadying patients during painful procedures. John Morgause, use the unopened packs from that crate, Sophia ordered, not pausing in her stitching. And check Torres again. I don't want her bleeding through. Yes, ma'am, he said quickly, moving with the stiff determination of a man too busy to be afraid. The basement had never been intended for this. It was a storage room, lined with crates of rations, tools, and dusty equipment. Now it had become an emergency ward. Cots were improvised from supply pallets, for bags hung from pipes along the wall. Emergency lanterns cast dim pools of light, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. Sophia's hands were steady, but inside her chest, a storm raged. She had trained for battlefield medicine, yes, but not for this. An unrelenting tide of casualties with no backup, no evacuation route, and no guarantee of survival. Yet every time she glanced at the faces around her, the young private with burns across his arms, the sergeant clutching his chest, where shrapnel had lodged near his heart, the radio operator blinking away shock, she felt her resolve harden. She would not let them go. Not one. Another blast hit nearby, the noise deafening even through thick concrete. A light fixture swung violently, sparking. Several soldiers flinched, instinctively shielding their heads. One man began to sob quietly, the sound cutting through the tense silence. Sophia looked up, her voice firm but calm. Listen to me. This bunker holds. These walls were made for artillery. We are safer here than anywhere else on this base. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but reassurance mattered as much as medicine. Fear spread like infection, and she could not allow panic to take root. Private Robert Williams returned from the stairwell, his face streaked with ash. Ma'am, the rest of the building's burning. Roof's almost gone. If we were still up there, then we'd all be dead. Sophia finished for him. She wiped her hands on a bloodied rag and leaned closer. What about enemy troops? Not yet, Robert replied, shaking his head. Just fire and falling metal. But it's only a matter of time. Sophia exhaled, steadying herself. Time was the enemy now. She had to buy enough of it for reinforcements to arrive, if they ever did. She turned back to her patients. Sergeant Torres grimaced as Sophia pulled debris from her torn leg. You should be running this base, Lieutenant, Torres muttered through clenched teeth. Not patching us up down here. Sophia allowed herself the faintest smile. Let's keep you walking first. Then you can recommend me for promotion. The words drew a weak laugh from several of the soldiers, a sound that felt almost alien in the suffocating bunker. For a moment, it cut through the fear. Hours crawled by. Sophia moved from cot to cot, never stopping. She improvised splints out of broken boards. She sterilized scalpels with the flame of a lighter when antiseptic ran low. She rationed morphine carefully, saving the strongest doses for the men in unbearable agony. Every action was precise, every movement fueled by equal parts training and sheer will. At one point, Private Chin stirred, trying to sit up despite the bandages around his head. His voice was slurred but urgent. Lieutenant, if they come, if the enemy comes, we need rifles. We can't just lie here. Sophia pressed him gently back down. You let us worry about that. Your job is to stay alive long enough to be stubborn about it later. The bombardment continued, relentless. Smoke filtered into the room, making every breath heavier. Sweat rolled down Sophia's temples, stinging her eyes, but she pushed through the exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shelling slowed. The silence that followed was almost worse, pressing against the ears, filled with the weight of expectation. The soldiers shifted uneasily, listening for what might come next. Sophia looked around the room at 18 battered souls. Every one of them depended on her, not only for their wounds, but for their courage. She straightened her shoulders, pushing back the exhaustion clawing at her bones. We're still here, she said firmly, meeting their eyes one by one. And as long as I'm breathing, so are you. In that moment, something shifted. The bunker, though dark and filled with pain, felt less like a tomb and more like a fortress. Not because of concrete or steel, but because one woman refused to surrender to the fire outside. The silence after the bombardment was not comforting. It was heavy, deceptive, like the pause between a predator's inhale and strike. In the dim light of the basement, the wounded soldiers listened with strained ears. Somewhere above, fires crackled and structures groaned as they collapsed. Every so often, a distant thud reminded them that not all of the artillery had stopped. Lieutenant Sophia Carter paced the narrow room, her boots crunching on debris scattered across the floor. She had bought them time, but time alone would not save anyone. Smoke was seeping through cracks in the walls, filling the air with a bitter haze that made every breath harsher. If the fire spread further, the basement would turn into a suffocating tomb. Sergeant Emma Torres, propped up against a crate, watched Sophia with sharp eyes. "We can't stay here forever. The smoke's already worse. Another few hours and half of us won't be able to breathe." Sophia knew it was true. She looked at her patients, 18 soldiers in varying states of brokenness. Some could walk, some were bound to stretchers, and others hovered on the thin edge between life and death. Moving them was dangerous, but leaving them was fatal. She made the decision with the same steadiness she used for triage. "We're moving. There are old service tunnels beneath the compound, emergency routes. They connect to the vehicle maintenance bunker. If that structure is intact, it'll be safer than here." Corporal John Miller shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, those tunnels weren't designed for this. They're narrow, they're dark, and they don't exactly welcome stretchers." "Neither does burning alive," Sophia replied. "Get the walking wounded organized. They'll carry the ones who can't." Her tone brooked no argument. The soldiers, though exhausted, responded with the instinctive discipline of those who had long ago accepted that orders meant survival. Private Michael Chun, his head swathed in bandages, struggled to sit up. "Lieutenant, if enemy forces are on the surface, won't they be guarding the tunnels too?" His words slurred slightly, but his concern was sharp. Sophia crouched beside him, tightening the wrap around his skull. "Then we'll find another way. Right now, survival means moving forward, not sitting still." It took 20 minutes to prepare the evacuation. Sophia made rounds to stabilize her most fragile patients, giving quick injections for pain and fluids for dehydration. She knew some of them might not survive the journey, but she refused to leave anyone behind. "Listen up," she said finally, her voice carrying through the smoke-filled chamber. "We move as one. Walking wounded help with stretchers. Keep your heads down, conserve your strength, and no one, absolutely no one, gets left behind." The soldiers nodded, faces pale but resolute. The emergency exit was a rusted metal hatch at the far end of the basement. Robert Williams forced it open, coughing as dust and stale air rushed out. The tunnel beyond was cramped, the concrete walls damp and lined with old pipes. The faint glow of Sophia's flashlight carved shifting shadows as the group began their descent into the underground maze. Progress was agonizingly slow. The tunnels were never meant for stretchers, and moving injured soldiers through the tight passageways required constant maneuvering. Sweat rolled down faces as men strained to lift their comrades over uneven ground. The wounded groaned softly, but not one of them complained. Sophia led the way, her flashlight beam steady, her voice calm. She gave short instructions, guided carriers around obstacles, and checked on each stretcher with quick efficiency. All the while, her ears strained for sounds beyond their own labored breathing, footsteps, voices, anything that might signal enemy presence. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. The smell of smoke mixed with damp stone and rust. Some soldiers coughed violently, their lungs protesting the mixture. Sophia paused periodically, pressing masks or cloths against their faces, urging them to continue. At one point, Sergeant Torres clenched her jaw against pain as two privates maneuvered her stretcher through a particularly narrow section. "You know," she muttered, sweat dripping down her face, "if we make it out of this, you're buying the first round back home." Sophia gave her a faint smile, though her own muscles ached with exhaustion. "First round's on me, but you're carrying it." The exchange sparked a ripple of quiet chuckles, a fragile spark of humanity in the oppressive dark. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Finally, the tunnel widened and sloped upward. Relief coursed through the group as the faint shape of a reinforced door came into view. Robert Williams hurried ahead, forcing it open with a grunt of effort. Cool air rushed down the passage, carrying with it the smell of oil and metal. They stumbled into the vehicle maintenance bunker, a cavernous underground space built to shelter armored transports. The contrast to the tunnels was overwhelming. The room was wide enough for all of them, with higher ceilings and sturdier walls. It was far from perfect, lacking medical equipment or proper lighting, but it was sanctuary compared to the basement. Sophia wasted no time. "Set the stretchers here. Walking wounded. Gather supplies we brought. John, check those emergency cabinets. Chun." She hesitated, noting his condition. "I need you on the radio. See if you can raise anyone beyond the barrage." Chun nodded weakly, forcing himself toward the dusty communication panel. His fingers shook, but determination burned in his eyes. Sophia set up a crude medical station using vehicle repair tools and whatever they had managed to drag with them. She stitched with wire when sutures ran out, sterilized blades with fuel burners, and improvised force stands from wrenches and hooks. The bunker echoed with every cough, every pained groan, every muttered prayer. Above them, faint booms still echoed. The battle for the surface raged on, but here underground, they had carved a fragile foothold of survival. Sophia stood in the dim glow, exhausted yet unbroken. She looked at her 18 patients, burned, bleeding, broken, and felt the weight of every life pressing on her shoulders. They were alive because she refused to surrender them to fire and rubble. And as long as she breathed, she would keep fighting the darkness for them. The rumble of distant engines came first. At first, the wounded thought it was more artillery rolling in, but Sophia knew better. The sound was different, lower, grinding, the unmistakable churn of armored vehicles. She froze, her hand still pressed against a soldier's bandaged chest, and listened. Above the echo of bombardment, she heard voices, foreign, sharp, echoing through the ruins of the surface. "They're here," whispered Corporal John Miller from his position near the bunker door. His voice was tight with dread. "They're sweeping the compound." Sophia's jaw tightened. 18 patients, 4 rifles, dwindling ammunition, and no contact with friendly forces. If the enemy found them, there was no way they could resist. She stood, brushing the sweat from her brow with her soot-stained sleeve. "John, keep the entrance covered. No noise unless they're on top of us. Everyone else, quiet." The room fell into tense silence. The only sounds were ragged breathing, the hum of the makeshift lantern, and the distant growl of enemy troops above. Minutes dragged by, each one stretching into eternity. Then came the inevitable, the sound of boots on the metal stairway leading down to the bunker. Sophia positioned herself in the center of the room, between the door and her patients. The hatch creaked open, and 3 armed soldiers stepped inside. Their uniforms were tattered from the assault, their weapons raised. They stopped abruptly when they saw her. One woman standing in front of a room full of wounded. One soldier spoke in halting English. "American doctor?" Sophia kept her spine straight. "Lieutenant Sophia Carter, United States Army Medical Corps. These are my patients. They are under my protection." The soldiers exchanged words in their own language before their leader turned back. His eyes swept the room, noting the stretchers, the crude medical gear, the blood. Then he leveled his weapon casually at a wounded private near the wall. "You, come with us. Soldiers, stay here." Sophia shook her head. "No, I won't leave them. They require constant care." The soldier's expression hardened. He raised his rifle toward one of the unconscious men. "You come now, or soldier dies." The bunker seemed to shrink around her. Sophia's mind raced. Refusal meant death for her patients, but compliance meant abandoning them when they needed her most. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. 5 minutes. I stabilized the critical patients first." The soldiers considered, then gave a curt nod. Sophia moved quickly. giving last-minute instructions to John Miller and Robert Williams. She pressed morphine into trembling hands, tightened bandages, and whispered to Sergeant Torres, "You're in charge until I get back. Keep them alive." Torres gripped her wrist fiercely. "What if they kill you, Lieutenant?" Sophia's voice dropped to a murmur. "Then you carry them until rescue comes." With that, she straightened and walked toward the soldiers. They escorted her out of the bunker, rifles at her back. The ruined base stretched before her like a nightmare, blackened skeletons of buildings, smoking craters, shattered vehicles still smoldering. The air was heavy with ash, every breath sharp in her lungs. She was taken to a half-collapsed structure that had been turned into a makeshift command post. Inside, an officer awaited her, a man with stern features and a far steadier command of English. "Lieutenant Carter," he greeted smoothly. "I am Major Andre. You will treat our wounded." Sophia's chest tightened. "My soldiers need me. Some will die without care." "They are prisoners now," the major replied flatly. "They will wait. You will save ours first." Her stomach churned with anger, but her face remained composed. "If you want me to work, then I need supplies, sterile tools, clean water, and light. If you withhold those, you kill your own men as well." Major Andre studied her for a long moment, then gestured. Supplies were brought forward, limited, but better than nothing. Sophia knelt beside the first enemy casualty, a young soldier bleeding heavily from a stomach wound. Her hands moved by reflex. Though every fiber of her being wanted to resist, her oath as a medic was unshakable. Life was life, no matter the uniform. Hours blurred together. She stitched torn flesh, set broken bones, and fought off infections with whatever crude supplies she was given. All the while, her mind lingered on the 18 souls waiting in the bunker. Were they still alive? Were the enemy planning to storm their refuge? At one point, she risked a question. "What will happen to my patients?" Major Andre's expression was unreadable. "That depends on your cooperation." Her heart twisted, but she forced herself to continue. For 4 long hours she treated enemy wounded, her body aching, her eyes burning from smoke and exhaustion. Yet she refused to let her hands falter. Then, above the crackle of fires and the groans of the injured, came a new sound, the steady thrum of helicopter blades. Sophia froze, lifting her head. Her captors did too. Through the shattered walls came the unmistakable sight of American aircraft, sweeping in low. The major's lips curved into a thin smile. "Your people have arrived. Now, Lieutenant, we negotiate." Sophia's pulse raced. Rescue was close, but her patients were still hostages in the bunker. She clenched her fists, determination blazing. No matter what deals were struck, she would find her way back to them. She would not let 18 lives slip away while she still had breath in her body. The thrum of helicopter blades grew louder, beating through the smoky dawn like the promise of salvation. Dust swirled across the ruined compound as American aircraft circled low, their spotlights cutting through the haze. From her place inside the enemy command post, Lieutenant Sophia Carter felt her heart surge with hope. Reinforcements had come. Commander Robert, she thought. He had found them. But her captors were unmoved. Major Andre stood at the window, his arms folded behind his back, eyes narrowed at the approaching machines. "So, Lieutenant," he said calmly, "now we hold the lives of your soldiers, and you hold ours. This becomes the negotiation." Sophia's pulse hammered. Her 18 wounded were still in that bunker, alone, fragile, and waiting. Every second counted. "Major, if you delay, they'll die. Some of my patients are critical." The major turned to her, expression unreadable. "Then you had better convince your commander to be generous." Static crackled from the enemy's radio. An English voice cut through, authoritative and resolute. "This is Commander Robert, United States Navy. We are here for our people. You have wounded Americans in your custody. I want them released immediately." Major Andre gestured for his operator to reply. "Commander Robert, we have 18 of your soldiers. They live only because of your medic. If you want them back, you will offer exchange." Sophia's chest tightened. It was a standoff, lives balanced on the thin edge of diplomacy. She forced herself to stand straighter, meeting the major's gaze. If you truly value your own wounded, then agree to a medical exchange. Let me return to my patients, and your medics treat yours. Everyone receives care. No one dies while we argue. The major studied her in silence. For a moment, she feared he would refuse. Then slowly, he gave a curt nod. We will try your way, but the exchange must be controlled. Sophia's heart raced as the arrangement was relayed over radio. The Americans agreed. Enemy wounded would be treated, and Sophia would be allowed to return to her bunker. It was not freedom, but it was a sliver of hope. She was escorted back across the compound, past smoking ruins and the charred skeletons of vehicles. When the bunker door finally opened, the sight before her nearly broke her. Her soldiers were still there, alive, but barely. Some had deteriorated badly. Sergeant Torres clutched her chest, fevered and pale. Private Chun lay unconscious, his breathing shallow. Robert Williams looked up from his post, relief flooding his exhausted features. "Lieutenant," he exclaimed. "We thought—" "No time," Sophia cut in, already kneeling beside Torres. "Report." Williams rattled off names and conditions. 2 had worsened with infection. 1 had started convulsing from blood loss. Supplies were nearly gone. They had been holding on by sheer will. Sophia's hands flew over her patients, tightening bandages, giving injections, whispering encouragement. Her voice was calm, but inside she was unraveling. Hours, precious hours, had been stolen from them. Now she had to claw those lives back. Above ground, negotiations dragged on. For 3 more hours, both sides argued terms while soldiers bled below. Sophia barely noticed. She worked with singular focus, moving from cot to cot, holding back death with whatever scraps of medicine and determination she had left. Finally, word came. An agreement had been reached. Prisoners would be exchanged, wounded from both sides evacuated, and Sophia's patients would be released to American helicopters. Relief crashed over her, but she did not let it slow her hands. She was still fighting for lives, right until the very last. When the bunker hatch opened again, this time it was friendly faces that appeared. American soldiers poured in, their uniforms dusty, but their weapons steady. Commander Robert himself entered, eyes sweeping over the devastation before settling on Sophia. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, voice heavy with awe. "You kept them alive." Sophia looked up briefly, sweat streaking her soot-stained face. "Not all are stable yet. We need medevac now." "Understood." He signaled his men. Stretchers were lifted, for lines secured, morphine administered. The wounded were carried up into the waiting helicopters, one by one. The roar of engines overhead was no longer fearsome. It was deliverance. Sophia climbed aboard the last helicopter, refusing to leave until every soldier was secured. As the aircraft lifted, she looked down at the burning wreckage of Alpha Outpost. It was no longer a base, no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard of steel and fire. But because she had refused to yield, it was not a graveyard for her soldiers. The flight to the field hospital lasted 2 hours. Sophia did not rest. She moved between stretchers, checking vitals, adjusting drips, pressing hands when fear threatened to overwhelm her patients. She was utterly drained, yet every moment reminded her why she had chosen this path. She was a medic. Her war was not fought with rifles, but with bandages, needles, and the refusal to let death win. When they landed, Commander Robert met her again. His words were quiet, but they cut through the noise of rotors and shouting medics. "What you did here will be remembered, Lieutenant. You turned disaster into survival." Sophia only shook her head. "I just kept my promise. Not one was left behind." Months later, she would stand in dress uniform, silver star pinned to her chest, honored for her bravery. Yet that was never what defined her. What mattered was the 18 soldiers who went home to their families. What mattered were the students she later trained, teaching them that true battlefield medicine was not about skill alone, but about unyielding resolve. In quiet moments, she would remember that night, the fire, the tunnels, the standoff, and remind herself of the truth she had learned. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is the one who refuses to stop healing.